Hey everyone, welcome to Off Topic Tuesdays. For those of you who are longtime viewers, you know that I consistently call out Norsca as a faction that I find extremely frustrating. So, what would I do to improve them if I were CA? Well, that's exactly what we're going to discuss in today's episode.
Wow.
Alright, so right out of the gates, one of the big issues with Norsca, and the one that I'm not quite sure how to solve myself, is identity. Norsca doesn't actually exist in the tabletop, and to be honest, the Warriors of Chaos and Norsca are effectively used interchangeably in the lore. They come from the same lands, they worship the same god, they hold the same beliefs. Even in Total Warhammer, which CA has tried to separate them, they still share a majority of the same roster and an almost identical playstyle. And this is one of those things that makes improving Norsca so difficult. General Chaos fixes will be centered just as much around the Warriors of Chaos as they will around Norsca itself, making Norscan improvements difficult, if not impossible, without affecting the Warriors simultaneously. So that same issue of identity plagues Norsca for a second reason too, which is their campaign experience. So much like their chaotic kin, the Warriors of Chaos and Beastmen, Norsca effectively operate as a horde faction, and horde factions in Total Warhammer border upon almost worthless, especially in Mortal Empires where Norsca finds itself, because there's always a litany of other factions prepared to resettle any locations you just finished destroying. For Norsca, it actually ends up being slightly worse than them too, because they're not even a proper horde, they just can't colonize south of their borders. And their last issue, and the one I bring up constantly, is their central gameplay mechanic, the favor of the gods. This mechanic's ridiculously unlawful for basically every character in the entire chaotic roster beyond Sail the Faithless. Norskins, like every other Chaos worshipper, either worship Chaos Undivided or pledge themselves to a specific god. But trying to change beliefs or trying to earn the favor of two different gods while neglecting two other ones or faking true devotion, that's a great way to earn the ire of the gods, which is almost always a bad idea. Even more frustratingly, while this concept could almost make sense with a generic or a newly created tribe or something like that, the legendary lords we have in the game for Norsca are all very, very clear worshippers of Chaos Undivided. Having them suddenly dedicate themselves to a specific god goes against their characters completely and makes no sense for either one. Alright, so I'm ranting and raving, but what would I actually do to fix them? Well, let me try to start with the first one, the hardest one, identity. This is an example where I think kind of leaning into the crash makes more sense than trying to fight it. CA already kind of took a mild step in this direction when they added the events to either serve Archaon or to fight him, and I think that could be taken even further with the two legendary lords we currently have. So Wolfric could be given missions to try and kill named characters to reach his endgame, including Archaon, for example, while Throg could try to hunt down, infamous monsters, infamous ogres, and infamous orcs, and neither of them will be particularly focused on global destruction like the Warriors are to try and give them two different objectives for what their races are interested in. Just we got to do something to give them an identity beyond just do what the Warriors of Chaos do, just do it with monsters and worse infantry. One other thing I would change is positioning. The Warriors of Chaos can go anywhere, so take them out of the north, leave the north to the Norskins, and put Chaos somewhere to the south, put them near other settlements, do whatever with the Warriors, but leave the north to the Norskins. But let's move on to something easier to fix, though their campaign experience. So, as I said, I would give the two legendary lords a much more tailored experience, which would go a long way to solving the problem with them being a Mortal Empire only race, too. Continuing from that, I'm going to tweak an idea I saw in the forums, which is instead of raising settlements and leaving nothing behind, the shrine to whatever god you left there should remain as a single building outpost with its own garrison. So, for example, if in a hotly contended area, you could pay to upgrade that single outpost to give it a bigger, better garrison to help resist immediate recolonization by everyone else around, as well as also to increase the spread of chaotic influence, and maybe to give like a bonus to troop healing or something like that. This one small change on its own, though, would make conquering the Southern Realms substantially less frustrating to deal with, and in fact would go a long ways towards fixing all of the Horde factions in the game. Alright, so now we've got a decent objective to aim for and a decent campaign experience, but we're still way off the mark when it comes to lore. So, like, the easiest, simplest way to fix this is just not to have the favor of the gods be mutually exclusive. Getting to tier 3 favor with Tzeentch shouldn't suddenly put me at war with Khorne, Nurgle, and Slaanesh. you know, and likewise for all the other gods. On its own, again, this would make the campaign so much more fun. Instead of just trying to rush whatever specific god you're going for, you'd be paying attention more to what favor makes the most sense at the right time. Events could be even added in to trade one god's favor for a little bit of another god's favor. And if down the road single god aligned legendary lords were ever added, it'd be super super easy to handle, as opposed to the current system, which would make such an experience just universally worse. It'd also be super easy to tie such a system into the Legendary Lords campaigns too. So, for example, when I was mentioning Wulfric trying to murder off specific individuals, imagine if every time he got all four gods to a minimum level of 1, 2, and then 3, like a Vortex style challenger showed up to try and duel him and kill him. And then, so killing all three would get into like a climactic battle, same as what you have in the Vortex campaign. Throg could be given a very similar thing with the same things. Instead of just a character showing up, he would have hunting parties coming after him and kill them off, or however they want to do it. Point being is, by giving them more of a tailored campaign experience, you end up fixing a lot of the frustration from just playing as Norsca in the first place. There's not really a reason to play as Norsca right now. But seeing as how we're already wrist deep in this, let's really go whole hog. I would probably say that a third Legendary Lord's almost necessary at this point, given that every other faction in Game 2 is sporting more than double what the Norskins have. There's a lot of great options available, but I'm going to keep all of my picks for Undivided. Starting with Angra Deathsword, great job on the naming, GW. Kar Odison or Berna, no last name given. The first one was the former lieutenant to the previous Everchosen, and it strongly suggested that Angra himself was actually the one who killed the Everchosen, because, why not? He'd be a dedicated melee lord, which would be a bit redundant in the Norsca roster, but they'd have a very interesting play between them and Kislev, as well as with Archaon, because they've got a lot of lore regarding those two things. My second recommendation, Kar Odinson, is a shaman with the Iron Wolves, which would fulfill a niche that we don't actually have yet with the Norscan Legendary Lords, and could also provide a much more interesting start position and justification for new lords or new units as well. My last one would be Berna of the Sarl tribe. She's a shield maiden, but has been blessed with mutation that allows her to summon crows. So she'd kind of probably have the built-in spell. Christ, I can't remember its name now. But of course, the one that summons birds and is good against large squads. Um, but the thing that's most interesting about her is she'd actually be a ranged hybrid lord, which would be a super unique fit, not only amongst the Norscan characters we have in the game currently, but amongst all the Norscan characters, period. She would also probably have access to shipbuilding just based upon her lore. I'll put a link down to her stuff down below if you're interested in, but she would have access to shipbuilding. Um, but even if we go outside of my picks, there's still a ton of Norscan characters left to pick from, though. We've got Bjerg Bornstruck, Svengar the Scalings, Akarak the Crow, Drenek Johansson, and even Lord Mortkin if they really wanted to pull one out of left field. Again, there's a ton of legendary lords, but they definitely need more to pick from, concerning we only have two legendary lords, and currently they both play the exact same as one another. So I've already picked everything else. Let's just throw in the kitchen sink too. So new units. I would recommend these because, frankly, we already have an issue with identity. So why not throw in Norskin specific units? And the way that this would help is because if you go from the old lore, the Norskins had a lot of stuff that was completely unique to them and had nothing to do with chaos. So first things first, I would add in the Huskarls as a elite infantry choice. They're the cream of the crop for any Norscan tribe. For example, the Mirror Guard of Sigveld are his Huskarls, for example. Another option we would have would be Norscan Whalers. They'd be an anti-large, high-tier ranged unit. They're essentially spear throwers on steroids, but they'd also have the aquatic trait and probably very short range to boot. Norscan Slavers could be a huge tar pit unit for the faction, and you'd give them the expendable trait, so when their troops, ducked and ran, the rest of your troops wouldn't care. Reavers could be another high-tier melee option. They would also have the aquatic trait because they are also based upon sailors and whatnot. Norscan Seers could provide a much needed second Lord option. They could act as mages and possibly even support Lords, but would be incredibly weak in direct combat. And I'd also change the Marauder Chieftains to be named Marauder War Leaders because that's what they were once called, and frankly, again, I feel like it helps differentiate them from the Warriors of Chaos quite a bit. If you paid attention to these units, though, you'll notice that quite a few of them come from well, the sea or had the aquatic trait, and that's because a lot of the older Norscan lore had them to be like actual Vikings, and I think that that could be a unique way to really separate them out from chaos. So that would be my own picks for what to do with the unit roster. Anyways, those are my suggestions for how to make Norsca actually interesting to use once more. What do you think Norsca needs? Or frankly, do you think Norsca needs nothing at all? Do you have any suggestions for a topic that you'd like to see discussed up in the future? Bring it up in the comments down below and I'll look into it. As always, thanks for watching and I'll see you all next time.